Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the reported battle at the 1922 committee last night, as some senior Tory MPs have apparently warned Sunak against a May election, although others seem to be in favour. However, with increasing speculation that MPs are maybe getting ready to replace the leader for a third time inside a single parliament, might well be that Sunak has to call the election quickly or risk losing power. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So I know I keep saying that the rate of scandals and disasters with this government seems to be an almost daily basis, as opposed to the once or twice a year for normal governments. But yesterday really kicked off. In fact, Unless PMQs is an absolute classic, I'm not going to be doing a video on it today. It's far too much happening. It's 1 week since the announcement of the big pre-election budget. What should be happening now, according to the plan, is that CCHQ, Conservative Campaign Headquarters, should be monitoring public opinion in order to see if the con has worked to regain some Tory support, closing the gap with Labour, in which case call the election for May the 2nd, or if it fell flat, in which case hit the panic button for a later election and go back to the drawing board. Only the plan went out of the window long ago. The budget fell very flat the second Jeremy Hunt sat back down. But it seems doubtful that Sunak can actually last long enough to lead his party into an autumn general election. Now, this isn't certain, far from it, but the fact that there's a risk means that Team Sunak surely have to work on the basis that he cannot guarantee his leadership lasts beyond summer. Now, it's worth pointing out an interesting thought a viewer on this channel had about this. So given that Sunak only entered politics to make himself richer, given that he will have done all he can by the time the election is called, and also given that he is truly awful at campaigning, there might be an argument that Sunak will not mind being deposed so that he doesn't have to spend 5 or 6 weeks of a general election campaign pretending to like poor people. You know, people who don't even have assets worth £100 million at least. Now, I can't possibly try to work out what might happen based on this notion that Sunak might not mind being sacked, because it seems too unlikely. Apart from anything else, I think Sunak's ego is too fragile to deliberately put him in a position where he dares people to sack him. But everything that can possibly happen now would be unlikely according to standard political wisdom. It's like there is no likely event left, so who knows? Someone at the New Statesman pointed out the Tories last week announced £20 billion worth of personal tax cuts and got absolutely no benefit at all. He further said there were a lot of popular projects that the Tories could have spent that money on instead. But I've been making this point for a very long time now. All the Tories had to do was just for 1 year, 1 year leading up to the election, just stop being quite so Tory, fix a few of the things they broke. Now, that shouldn't help them because they'd just be fixing a small amount of what they broke. But the fact is, it would have helped them. But they're just incapable, even strategically, of doing even some of the right things. They are the scorpion on the back of the frog. And I'll tell you how desperate some of these Tories are now. So according to The Sun, so take this with a shipping container worth of salt, a senior Tory has suggested that going long could reap dividends because if England win the Euros and we do well in the Olympics, the Tories could benefit from the feel-good factor and win the election. This was the second dumbest thing I heard yesterday. The dumbest being that the racist Tory donor at the heart of yesterday's main scandal can't possibly be racist because he has business interests in countries with black people. Yes, someone actually said that. A parliamentarian, no less. But this idea that, for example, England winning the Euros would help the Tories seems incredible. The Tories don't even like the England team. They keep taking the knee, being woke. It's even suspected some of them eat tofu. Every time the England men's team play, Tory MPs are falling over themselves to attack them. The idea that voters in England would be watching hitherto unknown success for the team at the Euros and then suddenly want to vote for the party that's attacking them all tournament, that is so far off the chart that I'm getting this senior Tory was probably Michael Gove after a dose of his Colombian marching powder. But what has people really excited is the news that Rishi Sunak had a private meeting with Sir Graham Brady. Sam Coates of Sky was pointing out that the last time a meeting took place between Sir Graham, chair of the 1922 committee of Tory backbenchers, and the Tory leader, Liz Truss resigned the next day. Now, Rishi Sunak hasn't resigned at the point at which I'm recording this, and I'm not expecting him to. These meetings don't just take place for the tap on the shoulder, but they are unusual, and they're usually an indication that Brady needs to tell the party leader something that's going very badly wrong in Tory town. Normally, Sunak wouldn't need such a meeting. You get the Tory leader will get the general view of backbenchers from their own whips. That's part of their job. So if Brady has to tell Sunak a few things in private, it would suggest there's been a breakdown of communication, a feeling amongst Tory backbenchers that their messages just aren't getting through. It doesn't mean that backbenchers are necessarily saying that his time's up. From reports, it seemed clear for some time that Sunak gives the impression that he knows best and he doesn't pay attention to his backbenchers. There have been rumblings of disquiet about this ivory tower behaviour before, and not just from the swivel-eyed loons. But I mean, you look at the last week, a budget which fell completely flat, and that was their last budget before the election, no matter when the election is, doesn't matter, unless they want to announce an emergency budget after summer. But why would you introduce an emergency budget when you're trying to tell the public that things are going well, according to plan? Emergency budgets for emergencies, right? We then had the defection of Lee Anderson to Reform UK. Now, most Tory MPs won't miss him, but it does just emphasise the fact that the Tories are losing resources to reform, the most important of which are votes. Then the largest Tory donor being caught out making really extremely racist comments, which was so awful that even the usual see no evil, hear no evil Tory MPs couldn't defend it. Some have tried. Most of them are going, yeah, this isn't good. Yesterday morning, Downing Street was insisting that the comments weren't racist. By the evening, they seemed to have changed their mind. The comments were not just racist, but wrong. Or that they're still keeping the money. Mind you, I am also seeing reports that it was Kemi Badenoch herself who decided to say that the comments were racist without Downing Street's approval. In other words, she went rogue. Now, if true, that means cabinet discipline has broken down. It will also mean bad blood and mistrust within cabinet, because if this is true, Badenoch has basically thrown cabinet colleague Mel Stride under the bus, making him look like a right tit. Not that the whole government can now avoid looking like tits. Their official position as of this morning is that Frank Hester has said a lot of racist things and continues to say racist things, but he's not actually a racist because he apologises for being rude when he gets caught. That is the official government line. When the budget was announced, that was supposed to be the beginning of a period of closing the gap with Labour. Instead, the Tories have had their worst week since Sunak became leader. And it's not just that these scandals keep happening, it's that Sunak is clearly incapable of managing them. Obviously, nobody is going to blame Sunak for what a party donor said 5 years ago, or even last Tuesday, but they can blame him for how he has responded to it. But all the speculation is about what Brady wanted to spend an hour talking to Sunak about, because it was Brady who called the meeting, according to reports. And it was an unscheduled meeting. It was therefore clearly an emergency of some sort for the party. Was it Brady telling Sunak that he feels things are getting very close to another leadership challenge looming? Was he saying that the letters are up to a worrying amount? I don't know. In which case, if Sunak doesn't want to be sacked, isn't that just going to encourage him to call the election more quickly? Some think he'd planned to do so next week anyway. But perhaps he could announce the date, but still leave Parliament in session long enough to get his Rwanda bill through next week. I will just point out, I pointed this out on Twitter, for anyone who gets excited, if you see news of a lectern being set outside Downing Street, if the government crest is on it, it's not a general election announcement. When they announce the general election, the lectern doesn't have a crest on it. So, or maybe the meeting was just Brady wanting to emphasise how much backbenchers do not want an early election, but they will back Sunak for an autumn election. But I'm not really sure about that explanation, because MPs could tell Sunak that themselves during the scheduled meeting of the 1922 committee. So unless Brady was telling Sunak privately what the consequences of that might be, I don't know. But whatever it was, whatever Brady said was something where he knew that it wouldn't be reported. Like a wider meeting, things get leaked. Private meeting between Brady and Sunak doesn't get leaked because there's only those two in the room, and neither of those are going to leak it. So whatever it was not for our ears. Really hard to see how Brady would have been talking about anything other than a credible threat to Sunak's leadership, because I don't think anything else would need to be said so privately and so secretly. The likelihood is that Brady will have been passing on a message which will have been some variation on the theme of Tory backbenchers are giving you one last chance, Prime Minister. Because if Sunak's position were secure, I don't think Brady would have anything to say in private. So do we have a race on now? Which happens first? Sunak calling the election or his party calling time on his leadership? Because if people imagine that Sunak would be leading his party into an autumn election, the chances of that have somewhat diminished with this news. It's very hard to tell when you're 100 miles away from Westminster and dependent on reading reports made by others. But, you do get a feeling of a sort of Tory end of days here. It seems to be just a question of how long they string it out, and can things get even worse for them? But finally, it's worth pointing out that there is an argument raging within the Tory party that urges colleagues not to try and oust Sunak, not to destabilise his leadership at all. The thinking is, if MPs back him to the hilt, if they say, Sunak, you're the one with the plan, we're going to back your plan, the election loss is then entirely his fault. And then those who were opposed to his plans can say afterwards, right, we need to take charge now because we told you it was all wrong. But if others are seen to be destabilising his leadership, then they siphon off some of the blame from Rishi the Wonder Marxist and dump it on themselves. There will then be an almighty row about whose fault the election loss is amongst the 5 Tory MPs left in Parliament. They'd really rather Sunak takes all the blame so the rest of them can move on after the election. Because, and if those arguments win out that they need to back Sunak no matter what, Sunak should be safe. Although safe to do what exactly and when, we'll just have to see. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.